I wasn't supposed to hear it. The kitchen was dark, her voice low, almost tender through the phone. Your brother means more to me than you. 8 words. They didn't echo. They carved. I froze in the hallway, glass in hand. Every detail sharpening, the pulse in her throat. The sigh of the refrigerator. The way silence suddenly felt like evidence. She didn't know I was there. She didn't know I was listening when she continued, and buried our marriage in a single breath. My name is Evan Cole. I'm 34, a senior project manager in civil engineering, the kind of work nobody notices until a bridge holds or a retaining wall fails. I like things solid, predictable, strong. Maybe that's why what happened feels less like betrayal and more like structural collapse. I met Lily 9 years ago at a fundraiser for children's literacy. She was the kind of woman who spoke with her whole body, hands sketching invisible pictures, eyes always locked on yours. She taught school back then, later moving into community outreach at a hospital network. She had this way of making small things sound important and heavy things sound solvable. Next to her brightness, my quieter nature felt less like shyness and more like steadiness. She once said I was the anchor she'd been looking for. I believed her. We married beneath cottonwoods. Simple vows and pie instead of cake. Our home, a modest brick bungalow with a tired porch and a stubborn plum tree, became our project. I refinished the floors. She chose paint shades with names like Dusk Petal and Lakebed Gray. On Sunday mornings, we made strong coffee and careless plans about future kids, a dog, and trips we couldn't yet afford. It felt ordinary, which is another word for safe. And then there was my brother, Noah, 2 years older, the kind of man who made strangers into friends before they'd finished their drinks. A creative director in marketing, full of big ideas and midnight energy. Where I built plans, he built moments. Our mother used to say I was the blueprint and he was the color. As kids, it felt balanced. As adults, it felt uneven. When Lily met him, she laughed and said, "You two are the same person split down the middle." At first, I liked how easily they clicked. Game nights, backyard movies, work advice traded across glasses of wine. He'd help polish her campaign pitches. She'd offer him the hospital perspective for his clients. I told myself it was teamwork. I told myself family was supposed to feel like this. Overlapping circles, everyone pulling in the same direction. But over the years, cracks appeared. Lily glowing after late meetings, inside jokes between them. That reached the punchline before I caught up. A playlist in her car that matched his exact taste. Hugs that lingered just a beat too long. Nothing damning, but enough to keep a stone rolling in my chest. Still, I filed it under paranoia. I'm an engineer. I trust data, not ghosts. Until that night, when she whispered, "Your brother means more to me than you." It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was evidence. And evidence doesn't lie. I didn't confront her that night. That surprises people when I tell the story later. But the truth is, shock isn't loud. It's quiet. It freezes you in place. Turns anger into cement. I stood in the hallway, her words burning through me, and realized that if I walked into the kitchen, if I demanded answers right then, I'd get lies polished to look like truth. Lily was good at that. Noah was even better. So I waited. The next morning, she came into the bedroom humming, hair still damp from the shower, bare feet slapping against hardwood. She kissed my temple like nothing had shifted in the world. I forced my eyes open, squinting into the light, and said nothing. Her phone was on the nightstand charging. I stared at it as she walked out. For the first time in 9 years, that little rectangle of glass felt like a loaded weapon. At work, numbers blurred on my screen. I drafted reports, sent emails, sat through meetings, but every time I blinked, I heard her voice again. "Your brother means more to me than you." I replayed it, hunted for context. Maybe she'd meant emotionally. Maybe she'd meant as a friend. Maybe the words were clipped from a longer sentence, but the tone. God, the tone. Soft, intimate. The way someone speaks when their guard is down. Not a wife talking about her husband's brother. A woman confessing a truth she should never admit. By lunchtime, paranoia had sharpened into purpose. I pulled up Noah's Instagram. His latest post was a blurry shot of a beer flight from a trendy bar downtown. The caption read, "Late nights, bright lights." 2 comments down, Lily's account. A heart emoji and still owe you for that one. Still owe you for what? I scrolled further. Photos of him hiking, her commenting, "Next time, I'm coming." A picture of a movie poster, her writing, "Best pick yet." Every breadcrumb was public, hiding in plain sight, and suddenly I felt like the last person in the room to get the joke. That night, I tested her. We sat on the couch watching some forgettable sitcom rerun. She laughed at all the wrong parts, scrolling her phone under the blanket. "Hey," I said casually. "Noah called me earlier." Her hand froze for half a second, so quick most people wouldn't notice. Then she smiled, too bright. "Oh, how's he doing?" "Good." Said he was busy with some project. Mentioned he might need help moving stuff this weekend. "Really?" she said. "We actually talked about that the other day." He wasn't sure if he'd do it this weekend or next week. She didn't even hear herself. I nodded slowly, pretending to return my attention to the TV. Inside, my chest felt like rebar under strain, silent but ready to snap. That night, while she showered, I unlocked her phone. It wasn't hard. The passcode hadn't changed in years. My hands shook as I scrolled. Most of the texts with Noah were harmless, memes, casual updates, quick logistics. But then I found the late-night thread. Messages sent after midnight, while I'd been asleep in the same bed. Him. "Can't stop thinking about last week." Her. "Me neither." "You always know what to say." Him. "Wish you were here instead of him." Her. "Stop." "You'll make me do something reckless." I felt my throat close. The phone slid out of my hand onto the comforter, screen still glowing. Proof. Data. Evidence. She came out of the bathroom wrapped in steam and a towel, humming again. I forced myself to lie still, feigning sleep. She slipped under the blanket beside me, phone now back in her hands. Fingers typing, pausing, deleting. The light from the screen painted her face soft blue. I kept my breathing steady, even as my ribs ached from holding in every word I wanted to scream. I didn't confront her, not yet, because suddenly I realized something bigger. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about patterns. About years of being the reliable one while Noah danced through life collecting admiration. About Lily gravitating toward his brightness while using my stability as a foundation. And I needed to know just how deep it went. So I stayed silent, but I started planning. It happened on a Thursday night. Nothing special about the day itself, just another string of gray hours in the office. Just another bland dinner reheated in the microwave. But something inside me refused to stay quiet any longer. Maybe it was the way she smiled at her phone instead of me. Maybe it was Noah's newest post, a blurry selfie with a caption that read, "Good company, good secrets." And right below it, Lily's comment, "Best night in a while?" I waited until she got home from her evening yoga class, mat tucked under her arm, ponytail swinging. She dropped her bag on the counter and poured herself a glass of wine like she owned every inch of our kitchen. "Long day?" she asked casually. "Not as long as yours, apparently," I said. She tilted her head, sensing the edge in my voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled her phone from my pocket. I'd slipped it out of her bag when she wasn't looking earlier. The screen lit up with Noah's name right at the top of the message list, her face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Where do you think?" I set the phone on the counter between us. "You left it unlocked." "Not that you've been careful. Half your conversations are practically public." She tried to grab it, but I slid it out of reach. "So, what's the plan here, Lily?" "Keep me in the dark while you and Noah laugh behind my back. Wait until I stumble across the truth and then call me paranoid?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. I pressed on. "Do you know how pathetic it feels? Lying in bed next to you while you're texting my brother. Reading messages that say, 'Wish you were here instead of him.' Hearing you whisper that he means more to you than I do." Her eyes filled with tears. But I didn't stop. Not this time. "I've spent years building this life for us. Every overtime shift, every late bill, every sacrifice. I did it so we could have a home, a future. And you threw it all away for cheap words on a screen with the one person who should have been off limits." Finally, she snapped. "You don't understand." I laughed bitterly. "Enlighten me." "It's not what you think," she said quickly, wiping at her eyes. "Yes, Noah and I talk. Yes, sometimes it crosses a line, but you've been absent, Evan. You bury yourself in work. You come home exhausted, barely say 2 words. I needed someone who actually listened." I froze, letting her words hang in the air. "So your solution was my brother?" Her face crumpled. "I didn't plan it. It just happened. He makes me feel alive again." "Alive?" The word lodged in my chest like glass. "Alive," I repeated slowly, "while I'm here killing myself to make sure we don't drown in bills. While I'm scraping every ounce of energy just to keep this family together. You're finding life in his arms." She flinched. For the first time, I saw shame flicker across her face. But it was too late. "You could have chosen anyone else, Lily," I said coldly. "Anyone. But you chose Noah, my brother. And that tells me this isn't about loneliness, it's about betrayal." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" I looked at her, really looked, and realized the woman standing in front of me wasn't my wife anymore. Not the one who used to bring me coffee at midnight while I worked on projects. Not the one who whispered dreams of kids and travel under the covers. This was someone else. Someone capable of dismantling everything with a smile and a secret. "What am I going to do?" I echoed. "First, I'm going to make sure you never get the chance to lie again. Second, I'm going to deal with Noah." Her eyes widened. "Evan, please, don't—" But I was already walking away, her voice breaking behind me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt something sharper, colder, a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of. I didn't know exactly what revenge would look like yet. But I knew this. It wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be messy, it would be silent, precise, and unforgettable. After she left the kitchen that night, the apartment felt like someone had opened a window and locked the door behind me. I sat at the island with the phone between us still glowing with Noah's name at the top of the message list. And for the first time, I let myself think clearly instead of react. Anger had lit the fuse. Reason would decide where it burned. Revenge in the movies is loud and messy. A smashed phone, a shouted confession, a car keyed under sodium vapor streetlights. I wasn't interested in fireworks. I wanted something else. Permanence. I wanted the truth laid out where everyone could see it, but without giving Lily the chance to rewrite it with crocodile tears. I wanted to build a frame so tight she couldn't wiggle out with a sob and say, "You misunderstood." I wanted to be able to sleep again. The first rule I set for myself was simple. Don't be predictable. No social media rants. No midnight texts to people who could be tempted to help me get even. No scenes. The second rule was just as simple. Gather facts, not feelings, not accusations, not the scattershot things you tell friends between beers. Facts. I learned to be methodical fast. I started with what I could access, the phone. There were messages, yes, but words can be deleted, screenshots can be edited. So I made copies. I backed up everything, messages, timestamps, even the small things that show intimacy. The late night miss you, followed by the quick home yet. Text that became a pattern. I downloaded cloud backups and saved them to an external drive in a folder labeled something neutral. Then I printed a few pages on cheap printer paper and stacked them in a manila folder that I slid into the back of my closet. It felt almost ridiculous, like keeping receipts for a crime. But every receipt mattered. Next came a quiet sweep through the house. If Lily had been careless enough to leave her phone unlocked, she had likely been lazy in other ways. Receipts on a counter, charging cables behind the couch, a restaurant reservation with 2 names on it. I found a printed menu from an unusual date spot, tucked behind a cookbook, an unfamiliar lipstick stain on a glass, an entry in our calendar marked dinner without the usual specificity. I photographed everything. Evidence would be a photograph, not just a feeling. I also started watching patterns online. People hide in the rhythm of their lives, and rhythm leaves tracks. I didn't have a forensic team. I had time and patience. I followed Noah's accounts under an old handle I'd never deleted, tracked the tags, saved public snaps that matched times when Lily said she was staying in. He had a habit. Late posts a little after midnight, stories removed after morning. I saved them before they vanished. Where he liked a joke, I looked for repetition. Where he posted selfies, I checked backgrounds for recognizable places. Within a few days, a lattice of proof began to appear. It wasn't one damning image. It was a pattern. There was a legal angle to consider, too. Affairs aren't crimes, but in our state, adultery has teeth in some divorce courts. Not the way movies show it, but enough to affect settlements and custodial arguments. I wasn't thinking about money so much as about control. Control over the narrative, over what the neighbors, the family, and any future court might be told. So I made one more quiet call, not to a vindictive lawyer, but to a practical one. A consultation. I paid for the hour myself and listened while she spoke in calm sentences about protecting my assets, locking down joint accounts, and how best to document emotional harm without making it sound like a petty vendetta. She said something I came back to later. If you want to be believed, don't act like someone ruining things for spite. Act like someone saving what matters. I wrote that down. Then there was Noah. He wasn't cruel like I had imagined. Maybe I had wanted him to be. When I found him 2 days later at the workshop where he took on carpentry gigs, he was the familiar version of my brother. Hands stained, a half-finished coffee cooling on the table. He looked up, grinned for a second, and then saw my face. "Long night?" he asked. I didn't smile. I set a cup of coffee between us and sat down. "You remember how we used to tell each other everything?" I started. "Remember when we trusted each other not to break the basement model cars or trash the old truck because Grandpa would kill us?" Noah's laugh faded. "You okay, man? Do you remember when we promised to keep this family tight? To not do anything that would complicate things?" I kept my voice measured. If he flinched, I didn't want to know yet. We were brothers. We had a shorthand. He tried to dodge with jokes, but I slid a printed screenshot across his workbench. A message thread with the 2 of them, a timestamp, and a line that said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Noah's fingers went slack on a piece of sanded wood. He looked like someone who had been given a verdict. "Colt." "You make it simple," I said. "You walk into my house, into my life. You smile at my wife, You whisper things to her no husband should ever hear, and then you expect me to be okay because you're family. I kept my voice low, controlled, because the last thing I wanted was either of us to explode and muddy the facts. He dropped his hands into his pockets and finally spoke in a small voice. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't plan. You didn't plan, I echoed, but you did proceed. You did choose to cross a line. The question is simple, Noah. Do you stop now, or do I make sure everyone sees the path you've been walking? Underneath the bravado, his whole posture tightened. I watched him calculate. I wanted the confrontation to be brutal enough for him to understand what he might lose. But not so brutal he would lash out and do something irreversible out of spite. Colt, he said finally, using my real name the way he had as a kid when the apology was serious. I don't want to lose you. I care about you. You should have thought about that before you began caring about my wife more than me, I replied. If you walk away now, no texts, no calls, no meetings, I will keep this between the three of us. If you don't, I'll do something worse for you than shame. I'll take the truth where it will matter most. To family, to friends, and into the quiet places where lies hold sway. He looked at me like the world had narrowed to the grain on the workbench. He nodded once. I'll stop, he said. I'll leave her alone. That was step one. He meant it in the moment. I knew that. People say terrible things in the heat of being cornered. The real test would be whether he'd keep his distance once the immediate pressure eased. I left him then with a single warning. One mistake, one slip, and the photos go where they can't be recalled. After Noah, I turned my attention back to Lily. I didn't storm into the bedroom and dump her clothes on the floor. I had kept my distance, let her sense the cold that had settled between us, and not give her a chance to plead until I had every fact aligned. There's a particular cruelty in staying calm when everything inside you is burning. But that cruelty buys you time. Time to secure accounts. Time to change passwords. Time to move important documents into a safe place where a sob and a story couldn't unmake them. I also prepared for family fallout. If Noah slipped, if Lily lied, their first move would be to paint me unstable, reckless, vengeful, a man whose jealousy had gone off the rails. So I wrote a short statement, not public, not dramatic, a factual timeline of events with dates and copies of messages attached. I stored it with my lawyer and sent a read-only copy to my grandfather, the one steady presence left in my life. If things went sideways, he would know the truth. By the end of that week, a plan sat like a tidy stack of cards. Evidence in a folder, a lawyer's line on standby, a brother who had promised to step back, and a home secured financially and physically. It wasn't revenge yet. It was containment. It was making sure that if the mess exploded, it would do so on the terms I'd chosen. The last piece was personal. I bought a new lock for the bedroom door and a little safe for documents I couldn't afford to lose. Birth certificates, our mortgage papers, the old boxes of letters I'd kept from when Lily and I were first in love. Buying the lock was oddly surgical. I told the hardware clerk I was tired of roommates borrowing my stuff. He didn't need to know the truth. I didn't either, not yet. The night before I planned to act, I lay awake and thought about the future. Not the one I had been building blindly, but the one I would build with my eyes open. It felt unfamiliar, terrifying, and for the first time in months, necessary. I had chosen precision. I had chosen silence. Now all I had to do was wait for the one slip that would give me permission to speak. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The kind of day when the house is too quiet, when silence feels like it's waiting for something to break. I'd already rehearsed 100 versions of what I would say, how I would lay out the evidence like an attorney in a courtroom. But nothing prepares you for the moment itself. When the air shifts, when eyes meet, and the masks fall. Lily came home first, balancing a grocery bag on one hip, her phone still glued to her hand. She was humming, distracted, ordinary? For a second, it almost felt normal, like I'd imagined everything. Then Noah followed. No warning, no knock, just strolled in like the house belonged to him. His cologne hit before his words did, that same citrus and cedar mix I used to admire but now wanted to scrub from the air. They didn't see me at first. I was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, glass of water in my hand, evidence folder on the table. Receipts, call logs, bank transfers. A printout of Lily's text messages with his name at the top. Proof. Hard and undeniable. "Evan," Lily said when she finally noticed me. Her smile was too quick, too practiced. "You're home early." I didn't answer. I just slid the folder across the table. The sound of paper against wood was louder than any words I could have spoken. Noah frowned, curiosity flickering across his face. "What's this?" "Red?" I said. My voice didn't crack. It didn't rise. It was cold, steady, the kind of tone you use when you've already decided how the story ends. Lily hesitated, then flipped the folder open. Her eyes moved across the first page, and the color drained from her cheeks. She glanced at Noah, then back at me, lips parting like she might explain, might spin, might beg, but nothing came out. Noah skimmed a few pages, then leaned back in his chair with that arrogant half-smile I'd seen since we were kids. "So you've been spying." "Not spying," I said evenly. "Verifying." Lily's voice finally broke through, soft, pleading. "Evan, please." "It's not what it looks like." I cut her off. Don't insult me with cliches. I heard you in this kitchen. I heard every word silent stretched, thick and suffocating. Noah crossed his arms, trying to play unbothered, but his jaw tightened. "You've always been jealous," he said finally, his tone low, venomous. "Mom and Dad noticed me more, the friends, the girls, everything. And now you can't stand that Lily." "That Lily what?" I snapped, my control cracking for the first time. "That Lily chose you over me?" That my own wife whispered my brother means more to her than I do? That's not choosing, Noah. That's betrayal. By both of you. Lily's tears finally came. She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Evan, please, I didn't mean it like that." I was confused. I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. Confused is forgetting where you parked your car. This was a decision. Every text, every lie about late meetings, every weekend that suddenly had plans, decisions, don't dress them up as confusion. Noah shifted in his chair, restless now. "What do you want, Evan?" "A confession?" "Fine. We're closer than we should have been. But she was unhappy, and you were blind. So what now? You going to cry about it? Run to a lawyer?" I stood, slow and deliberate. "No, Noah. I'm going to burn the bridge you two built out of my life. And I'm going to do it with facts, with truth, with law. You think you've outplayed me? You've forgotten something," he sneered. "And what's that?" "That while you were busy sneaking around, I was documenting. And when this hits court, when it hits every family member who still thinks you're golden, the story won't be about me losing a wife. It'll be about you two losing everything else." The room went still. Lily's sobs turned into shallow, uneven breaths. Noah finally looked rattled, the swagger slipping. I gathered the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked toward the door. I'm not shouting. I'm not fighting. I'm not even staying. You'll hear from me when it counts. And then I left them sitting there in the wreckage of their own choices, the silence heavier than any scream could have been. I didn't go home that night. I drove until the streetlights blurred into a smear of orange and then parked at the riverside and watched the city breathe. For the first time in months, I let the adrenaline ease out of my shoulders and the exhaustion take over. My phone stayed off. I didn't want the noise. I wanted time to think, to plan, to let the anger cool into something useful. Morning came slow and gray. I called my lawyer before coffee. He listened, asked 3 precise questions, and then said, "Good. Don't talk to them. Let me handle the communication. We'll file tomorrow." There was comfort in someone else's competence. Someone who saw my folder not as a pile of betrayal, but as a toolbox. The filing set everything in motion. First, the civil suit. Breach of trust. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Fraudulent concealment of marital assets that Noah had been funneling into shell accounts. My lawyer drafted it to hit where it would hurt most. Reputation, finances, the very legacy Noah had used like armor. We were careful and surgical. No grandstanding, just documented facts. Timestamps, bank statements, copies of messages, sworn affidavits from witnesses who were tired of being neutral. Second, I sent carefully chosen packets to a few relatives I trusted and to my workplace's HR. The goal was simple. Nobody could credibly claim ignorance anymore. If Noah and Lily had been betting on family silence and sympathy, they were gambling on a table that no longer existed. The reactions came like winter wind. Mom called first. Her voice was brittle and high, the way it gets when someone tries to patch a crack with lipstick. "Evan, please don't do anything drastic. We can talk." I cut her off. "No," I said. My tone left no room for bargaining. "You had the chance to talk when I was in the kitchen that day. You chose to let them sit in my house and lie to me." I'm done explaining. Her pleas turned to anger. She accused me of embarrassment, of playing lawyer for spectacle, but there were others who didn't side with her. My aunt, quiet, the kind of woman who keeps receipts and remembers birthdays, sent a text that said, "I had no idea." Call me my grandfather, who'd taught me that silence can be consent, sent a short message. "Be careful. Do it right." Those messages steadied me more than any apology ever could. Noah went on the offensive every way he could think of. He emptied his social media feeds of us. Photos erased, captions deleted, the digital record scrubbed like someone trying to bleach fingerprints. He posted vague, performative statuses about betrayal and being misunderstood. Lily's friends rallied with hashtags that looked manufactured. # victimized, # manipulated. The first few days, the neighborhood murmured. People took sides, others kept away. But the documents were methodical, boringly detailed, and they told a story that couldn't be rewritten by curated posts. An accountant I retained walked through the financial trail on a conference call with Patterson and Associates, the very firm Noah's Circle used for PR salvage. And the words self-dealing and undisclosed transfers rang louder than the curated narratives. When the first legal notice hit Noah's inbox, he started to fray. He lashed out publicly at friends who'd suggested he negotiate. Privately, he called our father, begging him to intervene. Our father, who'd always rewarded Noah's bravado with half winks and gentle scolding toward me, sounded tired. He didn't say much to me. Instead, he left messages for my lawyer, asking if there was a way to keep this in the family. My lawyer's answer was polite and definitive. Only if the family chooses truth over optics. Once the case moved into motion, something subtle but seismic happened. People who had learned to admire Noah's charisma began to look twice. The board at his company, men and women who valued reputation over rumor, quietly distanced themselves. Contracts were reviewed. Pending deals got postponed. The first client to cancel cited reputational risk. I didn't celebrate. I watched it happen and felt the odd, numb vindication of someone who set a boundary and then sees consequences follow, unavoidable as gravity. Lily stayed in the house for a week because where else did she belong? She called me 3 times, each attempt more breathless than the last, alternating between guilt and pleading. "Evan, we can go to counseling," she said once. No. I had to remind myself why I'd left. Counseling wasn't for her to avoid consequences. It was for her to accept responsibility. I didn't answer. Her mother cornered a cousin and tried to smother the situation with family history. People make mistakes, but family history cannot erase bank transfers or timestamps on messages. We had evidence. We had integrity in paper form. By the third week, Noah's bravado was brittle. Friends asked questions in private messages. Some apologized quietly. The law moves slowly, but social pressure moves faster. Invitations dried up. The house they'd once treated like a stage for their charade felt increasingly small. Outside of the legal theater, I reacted the only way I knew how. I reclaimed. The triptych of revenge I'd rehearsed in the car, that cold, strategic plan, wasn't revenge so much as repeal. I began the paperwork to end joint accounts, moved my personal effects out of our shared home, and listed the things I would keep and the things I wouldn't. The decision felt strange, liberating and devastating at once. I was building a life that excluded them, and to do that I had to grieve the version of myself that had expected family loyalty to be automatic. Friends rallied. People who had been neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who'd read the sanitized version of our lives on social media, reached out with coffee, meals, practical offers. They brought casseroles, babysat when I needed space, and sat with me while I filled out forms that felt like both paperwork and a map to freedom. Conversations with them were ordinary and real. No performance, no audience, just companionship. That made a difference. The day Noah's PR team called an emergency press meeting, life felt quieter, less explosive. He was losing leverage and the brittle self-assurance he wore like armor was cracking. But I'd prepared for that. The points of contact I'd handed to the lawyer, the statements from witnesses, the financial audit, everything in place so that when he tried to gaslight the narrative, the facts would stand in the doorway and say no. There were losses, of course. A few cousins stopped speaking to me. An aunt who had been like a second mother asked me to step back from publicizing family matters. My heart ached at each fracture, but a different ache, one that felt like healing, replaced the old ache of being ignored. In the evenings, alone in the small apartment I'd moved into, I would arrange the photos I kept. Childhood photos with my brother, some from better times. I didn't rip them up. Instead, I placed them carefully in a box with a note. For the future, when truth matters more than convenience. The lawsuit would take its course. Courtrooms, depositions, negotiations. Time would tell how much justice looks like monetary damages and how much like a life rebuilt. But by then, the real victory was quieter. I had stopped being a passive actor in someone else's story. I had become the author of my own. And as the first snow of the season dusted the city, soft and indifferent, I realized the real fallout wasn't the lawsuits or social fallout. It was the clearing. A clearing where weeds once hid broken things. A space finally big enough to let something honest grow. The court proceedings dragged on for months, but by then the sharp edge of my anger had dulled into something steadier. Resolve. Noah and Lily tried every trick, stalling, blaming, shifting stories. But documents don't bend to charisma. Judges care about dates, signatures, transfers, not family theatrics. Piece by piece, their performance unraveled until even they stopped pretending to believe it. The final ruling wasn't cinematic. No gavel slamming with righteous fury, no gasps from the gallery. Just a firm, measured verdict. Restitution of assets, division of property in my favor, and a note in the record about willful concealment. Cold words on paper, but to me they read like a release. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I simply said, no. This is enough, and it was. Revenge wasn't what I wanted anymore, peace was. I moved into a smaller house a few weeks later. A quiet place with creaking floors and a view of the park, where kids flew kites on Sundays. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. No whispers in the hallway, no shadows of betrayal lingering in the corners. Just space. Honest, simple space. For the first time in years, I cooked dinner without glancing at my phone, half expecting another crisis to erupt. I set my own table, ate in silence, and found the silence wasn't empty at all. It was full of possibility. Friends visited. Real friends. The ones who had stuck by when things got loud and ugly. They brought laughter back into the rooms, the kind that wasn't forced, the kind that echoed off the walls without carrying guilt. We sat with beers, talked about baseball, politics, stupid memes, ordinary conversations that reminded me what normal could look like. As for Noah and Lily, life wasn't as forgiving. His company cut ties after the legal fallout. She tried to rebuild with distant relatives, but word travels fast when you've burned too many bridges. They weren't villains in the cinematic sense, just people who mistook my loyalty for a bottomless resource. People who believed family meant never being held accountable. I didn't watch their downfall closely. I didn't need to. My lawyer sent updates, newspapers wrote small pieces, but I didn't dwell. It was enough to know the world had finally stopped mistaking silence for consent. One evening, months after the dust settled, I found myself walking past the old house, the one that had once been ours. It was dark, hollow, windows boarded on one side, a for sale sign tilted in the yard. I stood there for a moment, listening to the rustle of leaves, the hum of a distant car. No anger, no sadness, just recognition. That house had been the stage for lies. Now it was just wood and brick waiting for someone else's story. I walked away lighter, as though leaving more than a building behind. People sometimes ask me if I regret it, if cutting ties so definitively left me lonelier. The answer isn't simple. Yes, some nights are quieter than I ever expected, but loneliness with integrity is a different kind of quiet than the loneliness I felt at that dinner table when my wife whispered her confession. That kind of loneliness corrodes. This one heals. I've learned to measure family not by titles but by actions. A brother who betrays is not a brother. A wife who deceives is not a partner. Blood and vows don't grant immunity from accountability. The last message I ever got from Noah was short. We were supposed to be brothers. Why'd you turn against me? I didn't respond, but I knew the answer. I didn't turn against you. You turned against yourself the moment you decided I was expendable. Now, when people ask what I've learned, I tell them this. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when you collapse, when you're bleeding, when you're broken. It's who chooses truth over convenience, loyalty over leverage. And love, the real kind, never whispers that someone else means more. That night in the kitchen, I froze because the truth cut deep. But now I know freezing wasn't weakness. It was the moment the old version of me died and a new one took root. One that doesn't beg for scraps of respect. One that doesn't measure his worth by someone else's lies. I'm not angry anymore. I'm free. And that freedom is louder than any whisper.